Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is session number 21 on the Name of the Rose. And tonight we are going to wrap up the final scenes, the final stage of poor Remigio's Inquisition, and then move on to the far more cheerful. Well, okay, maybe not far more cheerful. But to the we'll move on to Jorge's big post-Inquisition sermon, which is a great deal of fun. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And another monk's going to die, so big night. We'll see if we actually get to the death. Not 100% sure we'll get all the way there, but we will see. Anyhow, just a couple quick announcements. We had TexMoot this past weekend. Lovely to see folks down in Houston. Great time connecting with people there as always. Looking forward to heading over to Belgium, my first visit to Belgium for Willowmoot on the 26th of April. So happy to see folks, see our European friends again. So that'll be great. 26th of April, Willowmoot in Leuven, Belgium. And after that, Denver for Mountain Moot at the end of May. So I have a little bit of a gap. The last weekend in May will be in Denver for Mountain Moot. So there we go. That is what is coming. Yes, Arthur, we should have that worked out. It's frustrating. We've been having difficulties with the venue again, like last year, which has been very frustrating. But we should have the Mythmoot stuff worked out fairly soon. I'm in the don't make me come down there stage of discussions with our venue. So we'll see. I am hopeful that we can get that resolved soon and open registration finally for Mythmoot. Anyhow. That, of course, Mythmoot will be held on the weekend of the 21st. I'm forgetting the actual numbers. But anyway, it's that the weekend of June 21st, from Thursday evening through Sunday afternoon is Mythmoot. Yeah. Anyway, let us get back to the text as we're starting a little bit late today. All right. So we were looking at the Inquisition scene for most of last time, but we didn't get to the very bitter end of the Inquisition, which I thought we should at least acknowledge. Remigio the Cellarer has just invoked the names of various devils with quite shocking blasphemy. That is, like, the Latin phrases he was using are Latin phrases that are designed to call upon God during various liturgical at liturgical moments in the services. And he's twisting them to invoke demons instead. Like, it's pretty shocking what he ends up saying at the end. And you'll remember that he did that when he was threatened with torture. When Bernard, even after his guilt had been established, Bernard was preparing to pack him off to the torturers to get more out of him. And to which Remigio's response was, what more do you... Tell me what more you want, right? And I'll give it to you right now. I can't stand torture. The Cellarer was now silent. When he had uttered the names of all these devils, he fell face down, a whitish saliva drooling from his twisted mouth and the clenched rows of his teeth. His hands, though tormented by his chains, opened and closed convulsively. His feet kicked the air in irregular fits. Seeing me gripped by a trembling of horror, William put his hand on my head and clasped me almost at the nape, pressing it, which calmed me again. "You see," he said to me, Under torture or the threat of torture, a man says not only what he has done, but what he would have liked to do, even if he didn't know it. Remigio now wants death with all his soul. This is interesting in a couple ways. There have been a couple things that William has said about torture. I mean, he has been consistently anti-torture all the way along, but one of the things that he said, remember this came up when in the first conversation that William had with Ubertino, when they were talking about the heretics that Ubertino had questioned. And you'll recall that Ubertino was citing the confessions he got out of them by torture, including, remember they were the ones where they took a baby and threw it around until it was dead and then ate it or something. Remember that all that kind of stuff. And William was like, dude, you got that from a book. That's, or he got that from a book, one or the other, the tortured guy. William was pointing out that none of those confessions, I'm about to say none of those confessions were genuine. At least none of them was original, was William's point. That what Ubertino heard, or even potentially what they said, what they confessed, was drawn from books. So that was one thing that he was pointing out about torture. But yes, Bricktails, in that same passage, William was talking about a lust for pain, about the way in which torture affects a person. And that's what he's referring back to when he turns to Adso, comforting him first with his hand on his head and on the nape of his neck, and says, you see? When he says, you see, he is alluding back to that earlier conversation about the lust for pain. And under torture or the threat of torture, a man says not only what he has done, but what he would have liked to do, even if he didn't know it. Remigio now wants death with all his soul. Lust for pain, exactly. Lust for death in this case. So on the one hand, William's anti-torture stance has been articulating his own on the simplest level, skepticism of there being any meaningful connection between what a person says under torture or the threat of torture, and the actual facts, the actual events, right? Now, somebody like Bernard, as William is going to go on to say in a later passage that we'll get to, I hope, Bernard doesn't actually care about what happened. He doesn't actually care about the truth. He only cares about burning the accused. So the Remigio's confession, his final confession, his blasphemous confirmation of any horrible thing, he basically jumps right to saying the most damning thing, literally damning thing he could possibly say under torture, right? Remigio's method for avoiding torture is to just jump straight to the end, right? He seems to say, I will say right now, whatever it is you are hoping to torture out of me, like you are hoping to get me to say later on, I will make it so that there is nothing more damning that you could possibly hope to get from me, right? That seems to be more or less his approach. Jackie, I agree. He's very aware of what he should say. And yes, we saw that being used in his own defense at the beginning of the Inquisition. Remember that that awareness that Adso keeps drawing our attention to, that Bernard is probably correct in saying that he is trying to perform weasel tricks, right, and get out of the accusations by clever answers. That, in fact, seems to be true. He's been coached. He knows what he's supposed to say. He also knows what is the worst things, right? Like, so it's a matter of applying that same knowledge in the other direction, right? At first, he was trying to say only those things that could possibly, potentially get him off during, while being inquired against, or having his matter inquired into. And now he is saying exactly what he knows will most surely damn him, such that torture won't be necessary, right? Because he realizes that it's the only way to avoid torture. But Calvin, I agree with you that there is... So William assesses this as a lust for death. Remigio now wants death with all his soul. How is this related to the lust for pain that he talked about before? And Fencing Frog was pointing out that it seems that he has a lust for death in order to avoid pain, which certainly seems true based on his response, even his own words against himself, right? He says he can't possibly stand torture. But I also think that Calvin is right. He says also because he feels that it is what he deserves. He doesn't want to go on hiding and living a lie anymore. He wants to be treated like a heretic. Yes, when he makes his original confession, when he confesses that he was, a Fraticelli at first and then a Dulcinian afterwards, when he admits all of the things that he did with Fra Dolcino and the others, that seems to be in that direction. What he goes on to do is sort of a step further, right? On the one hand, it is a step further in the same direction, right? Since I'm a heretic, I'm just gonna push it further, right? In order to avoid torture. But at the same time, there does seem to be a difference between Adso's impression was that the warmth of his initial confession, his confessing what he seems to have actually done, when Remigio seems to be actually telling the truth about his former beliefs, which he has since denied, that he shared with his former colleagues, whom he has long since betrayed, and his past acts, which he has... we don't know whether he confessed them or not, or whether he just concealed them from everyone, even his confessor. I don't think we know that for sure. Because, of course, if you've confessed your sins, it's okay to put them behind you. That's what's meant to happen. But it's not okay if you haven't confessed them. But in any case, he certainly has been living a lie, as you say, Calvin. And so, again, Adso sees a kind of freedom in that confession. His, Black Sabbath confessions, and his blasphemous invocation of the demons, is a different kind, right? Here he seems to have not to be free, but to be, it's pretty horrible, right? There seems to be a kind of constraint and a kind of, he's gone to the other end, right? He's gone from living one lie in denying his past and his former beliefs, still current beliefs he hasn't totally actually turned away from, that he hasn't in fact repudiated, he's just denied. So that's one lie that he's been living. And then there's that moment of clarity and truth that he seems to live in, at least according to Adso's experience of it. And then, again, briefly, there was this other now kind of new lie that he's living in order to avoid torture, right? But I think that there may well be, Calvin, as you suggest, an element of sort of self-condemnation, right? That he is believes that he should be killed, if not only for his, not because of his beliefs, but because of his cowardice, right? Because of his betrayals. It's clear that there is a level of him despising himself, not necessarily for the sins committed before, but for how he has escaped them, essentially, by betraying others in order to save his own life. So I think you're right, Calvin, that it's tied up in a complicated way, right? Having just had that moment of liberation where he's like, I won't be afraid anymore to speak the truth. I will speak the truth without fear. That moment of freedom then immediately is transfixed by fear again when he's going to be packed off to the torturers. And his fear of torture leads him instantly into another, where, like, makes him, again, explicitly by his own admission, makes him willing to do anything in order to avoid torture because he's afraid and knows he's a coward. Again, he calls himself a coward and says that he can't face it, but he will do anything else. So having turned away from his weakness before, he immediately launches back into the weakness. And I do think that there's a self-destructive edge to it, because having just confessed it, he is immediately doing again the thing that he despises and still remembers despising it, right? It's not unconscious. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyhow, his own, the extremity of his reaction, his physical reaction, his collapse here at the end shows that he's not just acting, right? I don't believe him to be telling the truth. William doesn't seem to believe him to be telling the truth. Remigio now wants death with all his soul. And that, I think, is complicated, right? It's fear, yes. But it is this horrible combination of fear and rejection of self. And he is, like disgusted by both sides, right? Of the life that he's been living. And anyway, yeah. And Maureen, I agree that with all his soul is tragic, is a tragic note in William's little proclamation there. The lust for pain he was talking about before was when people are tortured, that they become, in a sense, complicit. It's what he was describing before was really horrible. Remigio has, in a sense, avoided that, but he's only avoided that by this, like, totally nihilistic place that he's come to here in the end. A Fencing Frog asks, is this suicide by Inquisitor? You mean kind of like suicide by police, essentially? Yes. At the end, yes, exactly. The only difference is he's still not going to be killed right away, right? But yes, suicide by Inquisitor, I think, is precisely what Remigio is doing in his, like, why he launches into these demonic invocations and that sort of thing. Catriona says, are we supposed to assume that Bernard is just a sadist willing to take this confession as truth so he gets to burn someone? Surely he is smart enough to recognize someone just saying what they think the Inquisitor wants to hear to convict/evade torture. So, yes, he is. But remember, why does Bernard do what he does? Bernard is... Exactly, Calvin. It's just what I was thinking. And Gerald also. He has a political agenda. The Inquisition of Remigio is the master stroke that completely demolishes his opposition, the Franciscan Michael and Ubertino and the others, in the debate, which boils down to a political debate between the Pope and the Emperor, right? So this is the masterstroke by which he utterly wins. Like afterwards, remember, right after this, William and Michael are like, we lost, nothing we can do, right? So he's not just wanting to kill Ubertino because he enjoys killing people. Now, I mean, he does seem to enjoy his work. I'm not saying, but it's certainly not. I wouldn't use the word sadism with its implication of, projected sexual pleasure and that sort of thing. I don't see Echo pointing in that direction at all. Maybe I'm missing the cues. Perhaps there are signs I am missing, but that's not what I'm seeing here. What Adso is seeing is that it's politics, right? That's what William sees. That's what Adso sees. And so why is he Bernard? We were talking about how at both the beginning and the end of the Inquisition, Remigio's words reflect an intimate understanding, how he's been schooled about what an Inquisitor is going to ask and what an Inquisitor wants to hear, is going to be looking for, right? At the beginning, he shows that in trying to avoid it, right? In trying to resist, essentially, to save himself. At the end, he does it in order to condemn himself. He does it. He reflects his understanding of what he wants to hear by giving him everything he could possibly want. Right? Why does Bernard go along? He resists at the beginning. Right? He continues to call Remigio out for his weasel tricks at the beginning. At the end, he goes along with this. So I see what you mean. Catriona, sorry, I was just looking. I'd forgotten who asked the question. Catriona, I see what you mean when you're asking, like, why is Bernard okay with this? Why isn't he just like, well, let's torture him anyway, right? Because, like, whatever. I don't believe this stuff that he's making up right now. But remember, for his point of view, it's all the same, right? What does it boil down to? What is Remigio communicating to Bernard in that final confession? What's he communicating to him? Because he is communicating something. And it's not, I am an honest and earnest Satanist and have been my whole life, right? That's not the message that Remigio is communicating, and I doubt that that's what Bernard receives. what he's communicating is, you don't have to torture me because I will go along and say whatever you want me to say. Bernard, remember, is not going to kill him. This is how it differs from suicide by police, right? Suicide by police means, get them to shoot you right on the spot. Bernard isn't going to shoot him, right? Bernard isn't going to burn him on the spot just because he made these horrible, blasphemous confessions, right? He's still going to haul him back to Avignon with him and use him as testimony, to use him as time his burning at the stake as, yet another play in this whole political Pope and Emperor situation, right? So Bernard, has plans still. Like, he's convicted Remigio. Like, it's over. Remigio knows it's over, right? When he made his confession about being a Dulcinian, it was over. He knew he was getting burned from that point on, right? Now, what Remigio did succeed, I think, in communicating to Bernard, if I'm reading the signs correctly, is, again, like, you don't have to torture me. Whatever you want me to say, right? I will say whatever you want me to say in order to avoid torture. Look at what I'm willing to say. In this case, like, the very falseness of his confession is sort of useful, right? Instead of being off-putting to Bernard, it's great in that case, right? Because he knows, like, great. So in fact, like, this is even more useful than, extracting whatever I wanted to extract. Some other damning testimony against the other Franciscans present or whatever. So Bernard has ulterior motive. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's the whole thing. Remember that this is all of this from the beginning of the debates about poverty, right? When at the very beginning of this very long and eventful day 5, right? I keep losing track of which day we're in because the day's been going on for so long. That it's been this continuous pattern of hearing them talk at length about things, but then trying to parse what's really being said, right? What's actually being communicated. That's the political game, right? Where nobody actually cares about the issues. You just care about the points that you can score in the particular competition that you're playing against other people. I agree, Maureen, that for Bernard, the end justifies the means. Yes. Now, I will say, Maureen, it is true that the ends justify the means, but the means themselves are given at least, he's mindful of the means in the sense that he needs them to be sort of above board. Now, I know, like, an inquisitor, like, accusing and torturing people does not exactly sound like a fine definition of his means being above board, but they are, right? Within the scope of what is legal and what is possible, he is acting totally legitimately. And as a bonus, remember, Remigio is not just a tool, right? He's not just some falsely accused sap whom Bernard is torturing into saying what he wants him to say so that he can use that against somebody else. That is a method, right? That would be like pure ends justifying the means. For him to do something that he knows to be wrong, that is, making a false accusation against somebody and then torturing the person until they admit it and then using that, like, he knows that would be wrong. Other people would know that was wrong. But he's not doing that. As it happens, Remigio is in fact a heretic. Bernard's accusation of him has been wholly justified. Bernard's entire proceeding has been entirely justified, and Remigio's end will be entirely just based on their system. And so neither he nor anybody else can say that Bernard is just committing ruthless acts in furtherance of his political ends. He may be doing that, right? But you couldn't make it stick. He's doing his job as an inquisitor. Exactly, Fencing Frog. He did actually find real heretics. Both Salvatore and Remigio are, in fact, very guilty. Jackie, I'm sure the girl's innocent. I'm sure of it. But Salvatore and Remigio are certainly not, right? Yeah. Now, Calvin, I agree. He's also trying to get him to confess to the murders. That is true. That is true. Though that seems he doesn't care about the murders, actually. The murders aren't really his business. Yeah. Right. Marine says, but what is a heretic is broad. Very true. And remember, it is not a coincidence that we culminate a book which has seen Adso spend a very great deal of time trying to work out the difference between orthodoxy and heresy, right? Trying to work out how can you tell what's true and what's false. You know, what's right to believe and what's sinful, what's holy and what's corrupted. Adso has been really struggling with this, trying to understand how can you be sure? How can you know these things? And then it culminates with an inquisition for heresy. Yeah. We'll come back to this in a little bit because William's going to bring it up again. Bernard's casual approach to the murder mystery is an indication of his, how do you want to say? The difference in his approach, the difference between his approach and William's, right? The murders are almost incidental. It doesn't actually matter who did them. That's not his business, right? He has sought and found confirmation of the truth that he entered the Inquisition believing, that Remigio was guilty, and that his guilt could be used excellently to defeat his and the Pope's political opponents. Having established that, finding out what really happened with the murders, it doesn't matter. He does assume a heretic is a murderer. Marine, yeah, exactly. Because it's not worse than what he's done and confessed. Anyway, so yeah, whereas William cares very much. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Yeah, it's a secular court thing. Exactly. It's not really his concern. He gets him to, doesn't he confess to the murders? Remigio or close to it? He was denying it, that he killed the herbalist, but he lumps it in, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, with other things. Yeah, I can't remember, because when his confessions, Remigio's confessions, start coming, first the genuine confession and then the overblown confession, they just like roll over me. Like I have a hard time even processing them. Actually, yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, okay, he confesses in a way that makes it obvious he's lying. Yeah, no, that was my sense. Yeah, yeah, okay, no, that fits. It's almost like an indictment of Bernard. The confession, that confession, is almost like an indictment of Bernard, like the one little piece of revenge that he gives. Yeah. Anyway, here is, in my opinion, the most sinister paragraph from all of Bernard Guy in the book. His closing statement. But in carrying out this holy task, we learn that he who openly practices heresy is not the only kind of heretic. Heresy's supporters can be distinguished by 5 indicators. First, there are those who visit heretics secretly when they are in prison. Second, those who lament their capture and have been their intimate friends. It is, in fact, unlikely that one who has spent much time with a heretic remains ignorant of his activity. Third, those who declare the heretics have been unjustly condemned, even when their guilt has been proved. Fourth, those who look askance and criticize those who persecute heretics and preach against them successfully. And this can be discovered from the eyes, nose, the expression they try to conceal, showing hatred toward those for whom they feel bitterness and love toward those whose misfortune so grieves them. The 5th sign, finally, is the fact that they collect the charred bones of burned heretics and make them an object of veneration. But I attach great value also to a 6th sign, and I consider open friends of heretics the authors of those books where, even if they do not openly offend orthodoxy, the heretics have found the premises with which to syllogize in their perverse way. As he spoke, he was looking at Ubertino. Isn't this horrible? Right? He's doing a little prophylaxis here, right? He's doing some preparation. This is a grand way to cut off any future activity that you find undesirable. Bernard's not going to hang around a long time, right? He's done here. His work is done here. He's going to be returning in triumph to Avignon fairly soon, right? With Remigio in tow. Probably Salvatore as well. And there are several things he wants to make sure he does not see or hear while he is still there, right? He makes it very clear that what actions will be held to be preemptively suggestive of heresy, right? He doesn't want anybody to talk to Remigio. He doesn't want anybody to complain, right? To lament his capture, to criticize the finding, the conclusion, right? To criticize him. Notice, anybody who stands up and says this is wrong. Exactly. You don't even have to stand up and say it, right? You can just scrunch up your nose, right? Like with your expression that you try to conceal, you can show that you are in true sympathy with the heretic and therefore presumptively a heretic yourself. By the way, I love the progression here is really fun. He lists 4 simple things that anyone might do, right? I mean, presumably many of the monks are friends with Remigio. He's been living there for years in the monastery. It'd be natural for them to visit him in prison. It would be natural for some of them to say, I mean, all you'd have to do is just be like, oh, poor Remigio, whoop, heresy, right? Presumably. So these are all really simple things, very natural things that you might do without even meaning anything. But you don't have again, Jocelyn, you don't have to stand up, right? This is not about somebody taking a stand. This is just somebody having a very natural reaction, right? But the fifth one is the kicker for me, right? Because it was these four simple things, right? So there are 5 ways you can tell a secondary heretic, right? And there's the 4 really simple things. And then the 5th one is collecting their charred bones and making them an object of veneration, right? Yes. Okay. So collecting the bones of burned heretics and treating them like saints' relics and, that's a bad sign, right? That's a poor lookout, right? The way that the list of 5 equates the first 4 things with the 5th one, right? Which again, and you have to understand a little bit more. Okay, I doubt we're going to get to this tonight. Sincerely doubt it, because it's like about 10 slides down the road from here. But the passage which you may remember in, I think the Matins chapter, when they go with Nicholas down into the treasury of the abbey and see all the relics. So we're going to look at the description of the relics. But anyway, like, you have to understand that culture a little bit more to understand what he's describing here is an act which is, from Bernard's perspective, tantamount to a Black Sabbath, to like a blasphemous act of worship. I mean, it's, Anyway, yeah, exactly. You're making them a martyr, treating them like saints because they've died for their faith and all that kind of thing. But the point is, you've got these 4 simple acts of like potential thought crime, right? And then the 5th thing, which is this like overt action, large and overt action. Anyway, yeah. So, and then of course the 6th thing, the thing about the book, he adds a little rider. The authors of those books where the heretics have found the premises with which to syllogize in their perverse way. And that is a message straight to Ubertino, right? I'm coming after you. He didn't explicitly accuse Ubertino of heresy, but it was a shot across the bow. Now, why does he do this? Bernard is good, right? Bernard is fantastic. He's not a good person, but he's an excellent politician. After this, William, Michael, they're both of them like, he's going to have Ubertino killed. Remember, even William doesn't suspect he's going to have him arrested and tried for heresy. He believes he's just going to have him bumped off. Because what's one more corpse in this abbey, right? Why? Why is he planning to do that in that way, and B, warning him, saying this 6th thing while staring straight at Ubertino? Because there are 3 outcomes, or 3 things that could happen, right? Which would all potentially suit Bernard's cause, right? 1, he could arrest Ubertino. 2, Ubertino could just die. 3, Ubertino could run away, slink off, and go hide somewhere to save his life. If of those 3 things, what's best? The third thing is best for him, right? If you think politically like Bernard, if he puts him on trial, Ubertino gets to defend himself, right? It'll be a whole thing. And there's a whole bunch of people who agree with Ubertino, right? So that's a great way to like create more controversy and scandal and give Ubertino a platform, right? On which to like continue speaking his stuff. And he's good. Ubertino's good. He's a good speaker. So yeah, no, he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to put him on trial. He could bump him off. He's prepared to bump him off. William thinks he's going to bump him off. But that gets rid of him, which is nice for Bernard, right? Convenient. Like it shuts him up, which is good. But, it still runs the risk of like having him look like a martyr or whatever. But Gerald, exactly. If you run away, then you're guilty. Then you A, shut him up because he's often in hiding. But B, you make it so that he can't show his face again in these public debates, right? So it's the best case scenario. He's good. Bernard is good at this politics thing. He's horrible and ruthless, but he's very effective. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. Oh, and the best results for the least effort. Absolutely. Oh, he uttered one sentence and solved the Ubertino problem. I mean, and that's just like a bonus. That's for him just like a little cherry on top of this particular political victory, right? I mean, that's just a little flourish at the end of this. Oh, I saw you guys, by the way, you were right. A couple of you on Discord were talking about visiting prisoners in prison is one of those acts of charity that Jesus particularly praises, indeed heartily suggests, right? Yes, you're right. You're right. And so there is, on the one hand, there's a sort of irony here, right? In which we can see what Bernard says kind of boils down to, if you do what's right, you'll be in trouble. And yet at the same time, this is why Bernard is just giving a generous warning to people, right? He would hate to see a mistake made, obviously, right? And of course, if somebody were seen to be sympathizing with the heretic, that looks really bad, right? And then very likely, he would then have to investigate that guy. And like, it's, because it, suggests sympathy with a heretic. And, so, but it's, you could totally see why somebody would do that. So he wants to make sure this is a generous thing for him to do, right? Again, see, this is what I mean by the means and ends. Like, are his means horrible? Yeah, his means are horrible, but his means don't look horrible, right? Yeah. There's no mercy for a heretic, Jackie? No. Nope. Nope. A murderer, maybe, but a heretic, no. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, and certainly not for a witch. Yeah. Agreed. Anyway, like I hope you all know that I'm not actually defending Bernard here, but But again, you can see what I love about what Umberto Eco has done here is how he's brought us to this point. Like Adso is getting much better at interpreting things, right? Hearing people say things and understanding what's really going on, understanding what's really being said. We can get good at that. And he gives this brilliant example of this. And it's horrible. But it's really elegant how Umberto Eco has set all of this up. Yeah, Marine says, it's hard to step back and appreciate the writing. I get so angry. Yeah, I know. And the way in which Umberto Eco has used that, right? That's the thing that blows me away. I said this last time, but it's the thing that blows me away about this whole sequence, is that the more we respond with a kind of hatred of Bernard Guy, the more he shows us how similar we are being to Bernard Guy. That is remarkable. Anyway, another one of those Adso narration moments. William and Ubertino are saying goodbye. We will meet again, William assured him. God will wish it. God, however, did not wish it. As I have already said, Ubertino died, mysteriously killed, 2 years later. A hard and adventurous life, the life of this meddlesome and ardent old man. Perhaps he was not a saint, but I hope God rewarded his adamantine certainty of being one. The older I grow, and the more I abandon myself to God's will, the less I value intelligence that wants to know, and will that wants to do. And as the only element of salvation, I recognize faith, which can wait patiently without asking too many questions. And Ubertino surely had great faith in the blood and agony of our Lord crucified. Bunch of interesting things here. First, he's spoiling things again. Yes, jumping ahead to the future. And here referring to other times he's already done this. He's told us already that Ubertino is going to die mysteriously in 2 years. Remember, it was earlier on Ubertino said a thing alluding to this possibility, and Adso told us that in retrospect, he now, as an old man, understands that Ubertino was prophesying his own death, which did in fact happen the 2 years later. But yes, once again, with this frequency that is happening now, he continues to pull us out of the moment in the story, with this immediate contradiction of William based on what he knows to in fact have happened later on, from his perspective as the old narrator, not as the young novice following William around. Are we going to find out how he died? No, it's mysterious, man. But I think the fact that he's bringing it up here again implies that, the Pope's people did in fact eventually find him and bump him off. Whether it was Bernard himself who arranged it or somebody else, I think it's likely that that's what happened. Or who knows, maybe just coincidentally died of natural causes. Yeah. Anyway, but this prompts Adso to make a final proclamation about Ubertino. And remember, this is in a sense the end. Well, I won't call it the end because we're not at the end yet. But remember that Ubertino was at the heart of Adso's wrestling with truth and seeking for truth. And remember, it was Ubertino's certainty that was a significant confounding variable for Adso. I say confounding because on the one hand, he, Adso, couldn't tell the difference between Ubertino's passionate beliefs and heretics' passionate beliefs. He felt like that the lines were really blurry. And we have had several instances that have pointed to the blurriness of lines between a holy passion and an unholy lust, right? Whether it be Ubertino's passionate description of sexual lust, which made young Adso a little hot under the collar, right? Or whether it be even, those really uncomfortable moments when, like, Ubertino was hugging Adso just a little too passionately, right? We've seen all kinds of blurring of lines. There are all kinds of reasons to doubt that there is clear separation between the holy and the unholy, the true and the heretical. And again, this is why Adso was so confused about it. Part of the reason why Ubertino was, as I say, at the heart of that in both of the two conversations, the one with William and the one without that he had with Ubertino. But again, throughout it, despite the massive blurring of these lines, Ubertino was always marked by his total adamantine certainty. And that's the thing that confused Adso so much. It would be one thing to be like, yeah, nobody can really tell the difference, man, but Ubertino looks like he could tell the difference. And Adso's like, from where I'm sitting, I don't see it. Those lines don't seem really clear. It seems pretty muddy. But Ubertino acted like he saw it really clearly, right? So he's reflecting on this here. And what he says, the older I grow, the more I abandon myself to God's will, the less I value intelligence that wants to know and will that wants to do. And as the only element of salvation, I recognize faith, which can wait patiently without asking too many questions. Intelligence that wants to know and will that wants to do have, in fact, they marked Adso's own inquiries. Remember, he was like, I want to know, I want to be sure, I want to understand. And that's where he kept running into problems. Is that it never... Remember, like, his issue with logic? Where he had this, like, really simple idea of logic that, like, it could be relied upon to answer the questions. But he says he has come to see that faith which can wait patiently without asking too many questions is best. The desire to know and the will to do. He doesn't say they're bad. He just says he values them less. What he's suggesting is that he's stopped asking those questions in the way that he did. And when he, from that frame of mind, right, he wasn't exactly driven in the earlier chapters by the knowledge to know, like, whether Ubertino is a saint or a heretic, right? That was kind of at stake to some extent in his inquiries, but it's not like that's what he was trying to... He wasn't being an inquisitor, after all, right? And yet, there is a sense, there's a reason he brings this up. Wanting to know, wanting to do, waiting patiently. There's a reason he brings this up in the context of making this final proclamation on Ubertino. Maybe he wasn't a saint. But I hope God rewarded his adamantine certainty of being one. Ubertino had great faith in the blood and agony of our Lord crucified. Ubertino believed. And adds so generously to a now long dead old man, hopes that God rewarded him for his faith, even if he had other issues, right? And that the way that kind of wraps back onto Adso himself, I think, is really complicated and really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, JJ, he does point out it's not just faith. Not just faith in him, like belief in himself, which his first statement almost implies, but proper faith in what matters most, right? That's what he comes to there at the end. At the end of the day, he surely had great faith in the blood and agony of our Lord crucified, right? Everything else aside, he had that, right? Yeah. And Maureen, yes, Echo takes us away from the intense scene that's just been happening this way. Yeah, I agree. That's interesting. Here's the passage I was talking about earlier. See, we did at least get to this one. They leave. William, after confessing that Bernard is completely won, immediately starts talking about the murders again. And Adso is bewildered. Master, I said, today many things happened, grave things for Christianity, and our mission has failed. And yet you seem more interested in solving this mystery than in the conflict between the Pope and the Emperor. Madmen and children always speak the truth, Adso. It may be that, as imperial advisor, my friend Marsilius is better than I, but as inquisitor, I am better. Even better than Bernard Guy, God forgive me. Because Bernard is interested not in discovering the guilty, but in burning the accused. And I, on the contrary, find the most joyful delight in unraveling a nice, complicated knot. And it must also be because, at a time when, as philosopher, I doubt the world has an order, I am consoled to discover, if not an order, at least a series of connections in small areas of the world's affairs. Finally, there is probably another reason. In this story, things greater and more important than the battle between John and Louis may be at stake. But it is a story of theft and vengeance among monks of scant virtue, I cried dubiously. Because of a forbidden book, Adso, a forbidden book, William replied. Madmen and children always speak the truth is a really fun line. One of these sort of affectionately condescending things that he says to Adso, right? Adso is ingenuously speaking the truth, right? Like how weird it is that these huge events, instead of being, downcast at the complete failure of the entire mission that brought him here or anything like that, William is like, all right, back to the mystery now. And it's like, dude, some perspective. Why is this important? And he gives reasons, right? One, he's a really good inquisitor. William is. Better than Bernard Guy. Why? Because Bernard is interested not in discovering the guilty, but in burning the accused. Bernard, I believe that William, is acknowledging here that for Bernard, inquisitions are means to an end. We were talking about means and ends before a little bit. Well, I was responding to you guys talking about means and ends, in fact. But what it isn't about is discovering the guilty. That is, discovering the truth of what actually happened. He, William, by contrast, finds the most joyful delight in unraveling a nice, complicated knot. He wants to find out what actually happened. The solving of the mystery is the end for William. Why? Why solve mysteries? Why why unravel complicated knots? He then steps back to the larger issue, right? As a philosopher, he doubts that the world has an order. It's a pretty big thing to say. But he's consoled to discover a series of connections in small areas of the world's affairs. If he can understand and sort of show how things work, like the very application of logic that he employs, shows a kind of dependability in the world. In which case, do you see? William, when he, Anso, was talking about intelligence that wants to know and will that wants to do, William is included in that. He is not still, nor I think even at the time fully, living in like hero worship of William, his master, right? Yeah. Anyway, he's finding order in chaos. Calvin, so it's complicated. How can he believe that the world lacks order if he believes in a creator? It's complicated, and I'm glad he didn't say that right in front of Bernard, right? That would have been problematic, I think. But William, is comforted by finding that when you, in fact, make sufficiently careful observations, the world is predictable by logic. And then he says the third reason. So notice he's getting to like bigger and bigger things. One, because I'm good at it and I like it. Why do I like it? Because it comforts me. I'm consoled to think of how the world works, to think that the world does in fact work this way, that we can make these specific observations and draw reliably conclusions, that you can know things. And then he steps back even further. In this story, things greater and more important than the battle between John and Louis, that is the Pope and the Emperor, may be at stake. Anso's response, but it's a story of theft and vengeance among monks of scant virtue. Right? He's like, actually, this is a really sordid little story. How is shameful, sinful, criminal goings on among, horrible monks? How is that possibly more important than the battle between the Pope and the Emperor? Because of a forbidden book. It's not the theft. It's not the vengeance. It's not the scant virtue that matters to William. What matters to William is that at the heart of this mystery is a forbidden book. Why is that? Why does that make this more important? than the battle between John and Louis. At the end of the day, John and Louis, the Pope and the Emperor, he calls them by their first names, right, in order to make it clear these are just two people, right? They're just two people who are rivals in power. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter. It matters in the sense that it will impact the lives of many other people because they're two very powerful and influential men, and the decision of who gets their way and who doesn't is going to impact the lives of many others, like the supporters of the other one. So it's not that it doesn't matter, but it isn't a thing. At the end of it, it's just politics, and politics isn't what matters. But a forbidden book, that theft and vengeance among monks of scant virtue is happening because of a forbidden book. Now that touches on things that really matter to William. That's interesting, Maureen. William stepping back, providing perspective, looking at the bigger picture, which is similar to Echo stepping back in time when old Adso chimes in. Yeah. That's interesting, Maureen. He's definitely looking at it more widely. We can do a little bit more. Beno turns traitor. Beno, who stole the book, has now been promoted to assistant librarian and now has access to all of the knowledge that he was grudging was being held. And he's returned the book to Malachi the librarian and is now no longer on William's side. Beno, William then said to me, is the victim of a great lust, which is not that of Berengar or that of the cellarer. Like many scholars, he has a lust for knowledge for its own sake. Barred from a part of this knowledge, he wanted to seize it. Now he has it. Malachi knew his man. He used the best means to recover the book and seal Beno's lips. You will ask me, what is the good of controlling such a hoard of learning if one has agreed not to put it at the disposal of everyone else? But this is exactly why I speak of lust. Roger Bacon's thirst for knowledge was not lust. He wanted to employ his learning to make God's people happier, and so he did not seek knowledge for its own sake. Beno's is merely insatiable curiosity, intellectual pride, another way for a monk to transform and allay the desires of his loins, or the ardor that makes another man a warrior of the faith or of heresy. There is lust not only of the flesh. Bernard Guy is lustful. His is a distorted lust for justice that becomes identified with a lust for power. Our holy and no longer Roman pontiff lusts for riches, and the cellarer as a youth had a lust to testify and transform and do penance, and then a lust for death. And Beno's lust is for books. Like all lusts, including that of Onan, who spilled his seed on the ground, it is sterile and has nothing to do with love, not even carnal love. I know, I murmured, despite myself. William pretended not to hear. I love that line. Here's the worldly wise Adso commenting on, like, he knows carnal love, right? He's, still having his moment, right? With the, concerning the girl who's absolutely not under any circumstances a witch. He's speaking with this knowledge. Arthur, Onan is is very popular as an illustration in the Middle Ages. They loved Onan. Onan is a really short, very weird story in the book of Genesis about a man who marries his brother's wife. So he's Judah's son, and Onan is his second son. And the first son has a wife, and he dies. And then Onan is supposed to marry her and raise up seed unto his brother. So he marries his brother's wife, but he doesn't want to raise up seed to his brother. He wants to raise up seed for himself. I think. So anyway, he pulls out and spills his seed upon the ground instead of he's actively attempting not to impregnate his brother's wife, and he's immediately smitten dead. It's a weird story because of the like sudden, inexplicable retribution for his sin. Yeah, Genesis 38. Thanks. So he becomes a symbol. Oh, symbol. Might not be quite the right word. A representative, like the sin of onanism becomes more broadly a cautionary tale for sure. Certainly a poster child for sterile love, wasteful love. Many actions, intentions, desires will be associated with onanism, and that fundamental images of deliberately spilling his seed upon the ground so that it will not bear fruit, for which apparently God kills him. Eric, I agree. It would be an awful poster. I don't actually want to picture a poster with Onan on it. But yes, metaphorical posters only, please. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so, okay. Anyway, like all lusts, it is sterile and has nothing to do with love. So on the one hand, William here he's talking about lust, illicit desire. What is the difference between love and lust? Well, gosh, isn't that almost exactly like the question that originally led Adso to go back and have a second conversation with Ubertino, right? What is like this holy love that St. Clair had and Ubertino had with St. Clair, which was like a good and holy thing, but then there were these other heretics who were also her friends and supporters, but that was all like lustful and sinful. And anyway, so again, it was exactly that distinction, in part at least, that Adso was, that like led to Adso's confusion before. So William is explaining desire, inappropriate. So he's using lust, sexual lust, as a metaphor here, right? Beno's lust is like sexual lust. Indeed, he even says that it's a distortion. That's what he's saying when he says, oh yes, another way for a monk to transform and allay the desire of his loins. That is to say that often monks who are celibate, meant to be celibate, take vows of celibacy in any case, sort of sublimate their sexual desire, their sexual lust. But it's not just that. Mostly he's using this as a metaphor, right? Bernard's desire for justice is like lust. Notice, he doesn't say, he's not, by saying that he has a lust for justice, I bet you that some of you might have kind of objected when he said that Bernard has his is a distorted lust for justice. Like, he doesn't care about justice. What do you mean he has a lust for justice? He doesn't care about justice. For him, the judicial process is a means to an end. That end is not justice, right? No, it's not. But then again, lust. He said lust, not love, not desire, but lust. Sexual lust is also corrupted. Sexual lust has nothing to do at least nothing good to do, with the object of desire. I think that William is suggesting, if you would say, Bernard doesn't care about justice, he would say, well, no. And men who lust after women don't care about women either. If you see what I mean. Jackie, that was a deliberate opening for you to plug the Four Loves. C.S. Lewis talks about this a lot in the Eros section of the Four Loves. Yeah. So again, it's no, he doesn't care, but it's a distorted lust for justice, not a desire for justice, a lust for justice, lust like sexual lust. Sexual lust is intrinsically twisted. Intrinsically, you can't have. By the way, lust was a classic example of why the Aristotelian system of virtue was, many argue that was insufficient. Aristotle was like it was very popular. The Aristotelian system, when Aristotle was rediscovered in the 13th century, Aristotle's systems became really, really popular in the church. And so a lot of people started talking about, and here's a massive oversimplification of Aristotle. One of Aristotle's primary teachings, ethical teachings, is about the golden mean, right? It's about moderation. Aristotle taught that, morally speaking, either extreme tends to be bad, but if you stick to the golden mean, you're okay. Lust is a classic counterexample to that particular moral teaching, because what these other moral teachers would say, Christian moral teachers, is there is not an appropriate amount of lust that you can have. Lust is not on a spectrum with love at all. It's a totally different kind of thing. And no amount of it is okay. So again, it's not about moderation. It's not about finding the golden mean. Calvin said that's exactly it. Lust isn't excessive desire. The argument is that it's qualitatively different. And that's why William is using lust as the metaphor here. That's why, again, at the end, he says, lust is sterile and has nothing to do with love, not even carnal love. Carnal love, meaning eros, sexual desire. To have sexual desire for someone is to have carnal love for them. That it is okay. Like you can find the golden mean in sexual desire, but that's not lust. Lust is a different thing. Lust is an intrinsic perversion. Yes, so carnal love is separated from lust, can still exist outside of marriage. Well, yeah, in the sense of desire, sure. But it's, anyway, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here. But again, you look at what he's saying about lust. Look at his intellectual example. He offers the positive example of his master, Roger Bacon. Roger Bacon's thirst for knowledge was not lust, right? Again, it's not just like a moderate amount of desire. Again, notice how there's no golden mean here. His thirst for he was thirsty for knowledge, but he didn't have the kind of lust for knowledge that Beno has. This is the contrast that he's making here. Roger Bacon's thirst for knowledge was not lust. He wanted to employ his learning to make God's people happier, so he did not seek knowledge for its own sake. When knowledge becomes an end and not only a means to a good end, when knowledge is a means to a good end, then it's good. And no amount of thirst would be excessive in that case. If you want to do good, for people, if you want to love people, and your thirst for knowledge is in the service of that end, then you can thirst for it a lot. It's okay. It's not lust. Beno's desire for knowledge is lust. It's corrupted because it's an end. Lust for its own sake. Fencing Frog says lust is just for yourself and not something to share. Yes, exactly. Again, here, as Jackie will tell you, I'm quoting C.S. Lewis from The Four Loves. When C.S. Lewis talks about lust, in the passage in The Four Loves I was already kind of indirectly alluding to, he says that lust has no interest. Like when a man is lusting after a woman, he doesn't care about the woman at all. He is wanting a certain experience for himself, for which a woman happens to be the necessary apparatus. In other words, he's using the woman as a means to an end, which is an entirely selfish end. And that is exactly the distinction, I think, that William is making here about lust and desire. It's not about degrees. It's about kinds of desire. And it all comes back to the question of desire for knowledge. It's about a forbidden book, Adzo, a forbidden book. How do we understand this desire? Yeah, Eric, that's what I was trying to point to before. But it's complicated. And again, I don't want to get into the whole, I don't want to turn this into a moral sermon. But it's important, I think, to see that distinction here that William is making. Anyway, one last, this just finishing the thought here. Continuing his observations, he said, "True love wants the good of the beloved." Can it be that Beno wants the good of his books, and now they are also his, and thinks their good lies in being kept far from grasping hands? I asked. Here's Adzo, sort of generously trying to imagine, well, maybe Beno does love knowledge instead of lusting for it. If true love wants the good of the beloved, again, in the man and woman situation I was describing before, a man who loves a woman wants what's best for the woman, doesn't just want pleasure for himself, right? Beno is just seeking knowledge. He's just seeking the pleasure of knowing. In a sense, I think one of the things that William is suggesting, when the knowledge is being kept from Beno, when it was locked up in the library and he wasn't given access, he hated that, right? He was burning with a desire to know, in part because he was forbidden from it. Because the books were forbidden, he burned all the more, he resented all the more his not being able to know them. Not because he was going to do something with that knowledge, right? Not because but just because somebody told him he couldn't know it, right? And so he wanted to know it. And now, of course, he is going to be quick to turn to the other side and prevent other people from reading it. He's not going to, remember, Adso's kind of naive assumption is like, well, but Beno, he had a principled stand about how knowledge should be open and shared and not hidden away. But all he really cared about was whether it was hidden away from him. And in fact, now that he has access to the knowledge, it seems that Beno will be quite happy to see it locked away from other people, right? Yeah, he sold out. But here's Adso hoping maybe he loves the books instead of just lusting after them. Maybe he thinks their good lies in their being kept far from grasping hands. The good of a book, William says, lies in its being read. A book is made up of signs that speak of other signs, which in their turn speak of things. Without an eye to read them, a book contains signs that produce no concepts. Therefore it is dumb. This library was perhaps born to save the books it houses, but now it lives to bury them. That is why it has become a sink of iniquity. The cellarer says he betrayed. I think that's typo. Was betrayed? No, he betrayed. He was a betrayer. Like he did the betraying of other people. Yeah, okay, gotcha. It's a strange turn of phrase. The cellarer says he betrayed. So has Beno. He has betrayed. Oh, what a nasty day, my good Adso, full of blood and ruination. I have had enough of this day. Let us also go to Compline, and then to bed. Beno has betrayed. This library was perhaps born to save the books it houses, but now it lives to bury them. A forbidden book, Adso. A forbidden book. If signs are not... The point of signs is communication. And if signs are locked away, they become dumb and therefore pointless. This is no library, it's a tomb. Exactly. All right. And we too should go to bed. I agree. It's getting late. All right. So I didn't even get to Jorge's sermon after all. Darn it. I'm looking forward to Jorge's sermon, but that's okay. Next time we will spend a bunch of next time on Jorge's sermon, because Jorge delivers a kick butt sermon. I mean, almost any time you get a chance to like end a sermon with the proclamation of the coming of Antichrist, I mean, it's a pretty good sermon. So, we'll get to Jorge's sermon next time, and maybe even the next murder. Who knows? All right. So, yeah, let's, hard to imagine we're going to get much past where I said to read to terse last time. Let's go through terse. Maybe we'll get to Adso's vision in terse of day 6. Oh, but can we? No. Okay. The next one too. We can't skip a little short chapter in which William explains the dream very well, can we? So let's stop at Sext. That seems an appropriate day to stop on day 6. So, yeah, we'll stop at Sext. And hopefully that will be next week. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. See you next week. Bye now.